3 days lost, no food, no hope. 2 children, Hansel and Gretel, wander deeper into a forest that has already swallowed their tears and their breadcrumb trail. Their stomachs ache with emptiness, their minds blur with exhaustion. Then, through the trees, a miracle. A cottage with walls of golden gingerbread, a roof of soft marzipan, windows of clear sugar. It glows like a beacon in the gloom. For starving children, it is irresistible. They reach out, tear off pieces, taste the sweetness. For a moment, they forget the fear, the betrayal, the fact that they are alone in a world that has abandoned them. But this house is not a miracle. It is a lure built by something ancient and patient. And it has been waiting. They eat without caution. Hansel pulls down chunks of roof. Gretel nibbles at the sugar panes. Then a voice, soft, almost kind, drifts from inside. Nibble, nibble, little mouse. Who is nibbling at my house? The children freeze, but hunger wins, and they continue. Seconds later, the door creaks open. An old woman emerges, leaning on a crutch, her face a mask of grandmotherly warmth. "Oh, you dear children," she coos. "Come in, stay with me. No harm will come to you." But her kindness is a lie. Her name is Gruel, a witch with red eyes that see little but a nose that smells children like prey. In minutes, she seizes Hansel, locks him in a cage. Gretel is forced into servitude. The house of sweets becomes a prison of horror. The witch's only goal: fatten them, cook them, eat them. Hope has turned to nightmare, and there is no way out. Long before the gingerbread trap, the seeds of this nightmare were sown in desperate poverty. A poor woodcutter and his wife, facing famine, could no longer feed their children. Hansel and Gretel, the wife, later revised to a stepmother, insisted the father abandon them deep in the forest. Overhearing the plan, Hansel gathered white pebbles and left a trail. That night, moonlight on the stones guided them home. But fear and hunger are stubborn. A second famine forced deeper abandonment. This time, Hansel used breadcrumbs, but birds devoured them, leaving the children truly lost. For 3 days they wandered, starving and terrified, until a white dove led them to an astonishing cottage. Walls of bread, roof of cake, windows of sugar. What seemed a miracle was the witch's deliberate lure. She feigned kindness, feeding them richly, then locked Hansel in a cage and forced Gretel into servitude. The witch planned to fatten Hansel and eat him, and Gretel would follow. But Hansel outwitted her, offering a thin bone instead of his finger, when she checked his weight. For weeks, the witch was fooled, but her patience wore thin. Impatient, she decided to eat them both. She coaxed Gretel to check the oven's heat, but Gretel sensed the trap. As the witch leaned in, Gretel shoved her into the flames, slammed the iron door, and bolted it. The witch burned alive. Freed, Hansel and Gretel discovered chests of pearls and precious stones. They filled their pockets and fled. The witch woods. At a wide river, a white duck ferried them across. They returned home to find only their father. His wife had died. Overjoyed, he welcomed them, and with the treasure, they lived happily ever after. But to understand why this tale endures, we have to look past the fantasy and into the grim reality that gave birth to it. Folklorist Jack Zipes traces the earliest known versions of Hansel and Gretel to late medieval Germany, roughly between 1250 and 1500. These were not yet written stories, but oral tales told by peasants. stories reflecting the stark horrors of daily life. Widespread famines, lack of effective birth control, and crushing poverty forced many families to abandon children they could not feed. Children were left in forests or at church doors, a desperate act that survivors would never forget. The tale's wicked stepmother, Zipes argues, likely emerged from the tensions following a mother's death in childbirth, a common tragedy when a father remarried and the new wife resented her stepchildren. In essence, the witch in the gingerbread house is a monstrous exaggeration of the very adults who were supposed to protect them. The candy house itself, so irresistible to starving children, has a surprising literary ancestor. The earliest known precursor appears in a 14th century manuscript describing the mythical Land of Cockayne, a medieval fantasy of abundance where houses were made of pastries and food was plentiful. This vision of paradise became twisted into the witch's trap, a place that promises nourishment but delivers only death. By the time the brothers Grimm collected the tale in the 19th century, the story had already been classified by folklorists as ATU 327A, a part of a wider folktale complex that includes variations like Charles Perrault's Little Thumb and Giambattista Basile's Nanillo and Nanella. These tales share a core pattern. Children lost in the wilderness encounter a cannibalistic figure and must use their wits to survive. Linguist Edward Vajda has proposed an even deeper origin for these abandonment tales. He suggests they preserve remnants of Proto-Indo-European coming-of-age rites, rituals where young initiates were symbolically left in the wild, forced to overcome trials, and then return to the community as adults. The witch's oven, the dark forest, the false promise of safety, these elements echo ancient tests of courage and resourcefulness. What seems like a simple fairy tale is actually a vessel carrying thousands of years of human fear and learning. The story of Hansel and Gretel is not just a warning about strangers or woods. It's a cultural survival guide, encoded in a narrative so memorable that it has been passed down through centuries, always reminding us of the dangers that lie just beyond the safety of home. But Hansel and Gretel is far from the only story of its kind. Folklorists classify the children and ogre motif as Arne Thompson Uther type 327, a complex network of interconnected tales found across Europe, the Americas, and beyond. Unlike a simple fairy tale, ATU 327 is a folktale complex, each depicting children falling under the power of an ogre or witch and escaping through clever tricks. Consider the Puerto Rican variant, where the brother pushes the witch into the oven, a twist familiar from the Grimms. In Denmark, there's Pandakegiset, or Pancake House, where children outwit a cannibalistic hag. And from Jamaica, collected in Mandeville, comes The Children and the Witch, where siblings use their wits to survive a similar predator. These are not isolated tales. They are cultural echoes of a shared narrative pattern. The spread of this motif is astonishing. In France, Antoinette Bon published The Lost Children in 1887, while Moravia contributed Old Gruel in 1899. England has Molly Whuppie, a story where a girl tricks a giant. Even the United States has recorded variants, such as the one collected by folklorist James Taylor Adams. Folklorist Stith Thompson, analyzing these tales, noted the remarkable similarity between subtypes 327A, the Hansel and Gretel type, and 327B, where the ogre kills his own children. He concluded that it is quite impossible to disentangle the two tales. Indeed, the complex extends further. 327C has a witch carrying a boy home in a sack. 327D, the kittle cattle car, where a girl tricks an ogre into hanging himself. And 327F, the fisher boy who pushes the witch's daughter into the oven. The core pattern remains consistent. Children, often abandoned, use cunning to escape a terrible fate. This deep pattern suggests that the story of children versus a cannibalistic being is not a mere fantasy, but a cultural survival mechanism. It encodes ancient fears of starvation, abandonment, and predation, while demonstrating that intelligence and teamwork can triumph. The motif's global reach, from Puerto Rico to Denmark, Jamaica to Moravia, indicates that these anxieties are universal, transcending language and geography. Whether the villain is a witch, an ogre, or a giant, the lesson is the same. Even in the darkest forest, wit can outmatch brute force. And, as we'll see in our final section, this narrative complex reveals profound truths about the human condition itself. The global spread of the children and ogre motif reveals a stark truth. These tales are not just about witches and candy houses. They are coded responses to real, bone-deep anxieties that have haunted humanity for millennia. At the core lies the terror of poverty, the fear that hunger will force a parent to do the unthinkable. In the Grimm's version, the famine is so severe that the woodcutter's wife declares, "Then all 4 of us will starve," and the father reluctantly agrees to abandon his own children. This is not fantasy. In medieval Europe, famine and lack of birth control made child abandonment a grim reality. The witch's house, built of bread and cake, is temptation itself, a lure for hungry innocents into mortal danger. The trauma of abandonment is visceral and unforgotten. The children wander terrified through the dark woods, and the parents are not spared either. In Perrault's Little Thumb, the mother went to bed in tears before the first abandonment, and the father later despairs that he had not had even one happy hour after leaving them. The ogre or witch embodies the ultimate fear, that the world outside the home is predatory and will consume one's children. Yet these tales do not leave us in despair. They also dramatize resilience and ingenuity. Gretel shoves the witch into the oven. Little Thumb uses pebbles and magical boots to outwit giants. The message is clear. Even in the face of starvation, betrayal, and cannibalistic threats, cleverness and solidarity can prevail. These narratives persist because they give shape to the deepest parental terrors and to the hope that children can survive and even thrive against impossible odds. Folklorist Jack Zipes has argued that the tale ultimately celebrates the symbolic order of the patriarchal home, seen as a haven protected from outside dangers, while systematically denigrating adult female characters who are often conflated with the witch. But beyond that interpretation, the story speaks to a universal human condition: the struggle against scarcity, the fear of losing what we love, and the fierce determination to overcome. The forest is not just a place of danger, it is a mirror of our own vulnerabilities. And in that mirror, we see not only our worst fears, but also our greatest strengths.